Earlier today, Conor McGregor did a bunch of press for BKFC, Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, and I am shocked that this is not bigger news. He essentially confirmed that he's leaving the UFC for BKFC. Now, that may not be what he's doing. This may just be open negotiations with Dana White. But either way, it could be both. It could be open negotiations with Dana White. It also could be that's his plan. And it is very, very interesting, and it's not getting enough coverage. And I seen a clip or two from the usual suspects on Twitter, Instagram, and then I went and sought out the original sources. By the way, guys, when you see fight news, when you see something interesting, always seek out original sources for more context. And man, did I find a bunch of different clips that I'm going to show you that basically backs up my theory that Conor McGregor is going to leave the UFC. And most likely for BKFC, which is a theory that I've had for a while. Maybe it's just Conor really trying to press Dana White, because Dana White recently spoke about Conor McGregor, and I told you guys, and I made a video about this, it seemed like more negotiations was going on. I just made that video yesterday. I'll link it down in the description. But this is going to get very, very interesting really quick, because he talked about his future with the UFC. He talked about his future with BKFC now that he's a proud partial owner. And he also talked about the Michael Chandler fight. So we're going to get to all that in this video. I want to start off with two things. First, I want to start off with breaking down the sunset clause. For those of you who do not know, the sunset clause was added after the antitrust lawsuit. To sum it up, I want to make this quick. 5 years from the time you sign your contract, you are now out of your contract. You cannot be held hostage by the UFC. Now, the UFC added this provision as a way to look better in the court's eyes while they went through the antitrust lawsuit. Now, they did this, and Francis Ngannou, that's how he left the UFC. Since then, I believe in 2022, either late 2022 or early 2023, I think it was reported in 2023, they've changed that provision to make it more restrictive. You can read that here. This is a article from Bloody Elbow that's no longer up, that I went on the way back machine and pulled up, but they tweaked it where now it's 5 years from the time you complete the first fight on your contract, as well as it doesn't include suspensions or this and that. So they made it a little bit more restrictive, but this doesn't matter because this was changed in 2022, 2023. Conor McGregor most likely signed a contract either in 2020 or 2019, which is very interesting when you look at that 5-year number. So I wanted to break that down because I think that is very interesting when you look at Conor McGregor's contract situation with the UFC. Now, the first clip I want to show you is Dana White. I showed this yesterday. I did a video breakdown on this, but I want to show you this because this is very important for context. A lot of you guys may already know this, but I want to break it down for some people who may not realize what's going on. Let's listen to it.
Okay, I hope I'm not pushing boundaries. Conor McGregor and Max Holloway, will we see it? Yes or no?
If Conor McGregor fights again, it's obviously a great fight.
If Conor McGregor fights again, that's obviously a great fight. I know I'm parroting what Dana says, but if Conor fights again,
it's a great fight. Him and Chandler is a great fight too. Conor and Chandler is a great fight. There's a lot of fights out there for Conor. The Conor thing is much like Ronda. I mean, if you look at Ronda, so many opportunities fell on Ronda because of who she was and her personality, her looks, everything that she had as a package ended up being her downfall, right? It's just the money and everything else. Ronda went from living in her car to being so extremely wealthy that she doesn't have to work. She doesn't have to do anything. She's got a great life. She's got like 3 or 4 houses and great places and all these things. And Conor McGregor is 10 times that. When that kind of money becomes, involved in the fight business, it's tough, man.
I can imagine.
So there you go. Dana White, what does he say? If Conor McGregor fights again, and yeah, Conor's so rich, and he's 10 times richer than Ronda Rousey, who doesn't have to work anymore. For those of you who do not know, I know a lot of you guys are probably screaming at the screen right now. Joey, we already know. When Dana White is in negotiations with someone, oh, well, they say they want to fight, but do they really want to fight? And, oh, they got so much money, they don't care to fight anymore. It's hard to get out of silk sheets and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. I broke this down yesterday in another video. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I want to get into the Conor McGregor clips. But Dana White is publicly negotiating with Conor McGregor right now. He's telling the fans, look, he's got so much money, he may never fight again. That's what Dana is saying here. He always says that when there's negotiations going on behind closed doors. Now, before we get into the Conor McGregor clip, You know, I know I've been taking quite a bit of victory laps lately, but look at this. Look at this. This is like 2 years ago, basically, at this point. This is from the early 2023. Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler will not happen. Look at the thumbnail. Look at the thumbnail. I can't hover over it because it'll just play. Heading to BKFC. And I said in that video, I guarantee at some point Conor McGregor will fight in BKFC. And that's when he made his first appearance at BKFC. Okay, let's get on to the actual clips. We're going to go a little bit out of order here because it just makes sense the way we're going to break it down. But listen to the way he talks about David Feldman. Now, I understand Conor's being a promoter, but David Feldman is the other owner. He's the president of the BKFC. And listen to the way Conor hypes him up and says how much he loves him. Sounds like they're getting ready to go into more than just both owning BKFC. It sounds like Conor's getting ready to fight for him. Listen to this.
You know, he's stuck with his guns, and you know he's an incredible man, a visionary, an absolute visionary. And we're all grateful for David up here, media, press, fighters, the whole team here at Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. David, you're some man, and I'm honoured to be here alongside you.
I mean, literally the way Conor's talking about him, and I understand they're business partners. It sounds like the way Michael Chandler talks about Conor McGregor. He's an incredible man. I'm honored to be in the same room as him. He's so great. And it goes on. And listen to something he says. There's something very key here.
I have a big belief in what you're doing, and I back you all the way, brother. I absolutely back you all the way. You know, for me, my main thing, he's an absolutely incredible matchmaker. A really, truly incredible matchmaker. The matchmaking in Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship throughout its young history has been stellar. Absolutely stellar.
So he goes on to compliment the matchmaking. What would be perfect for a Conor McGregor who's coming back from a broken leg, who is primarily a striker, who's 36 years old, if he goes over to a company that he partially owns and he fights for them and gets hand-picked matchups rather than fighting in the UFC and getting destroyed by elite-level opposition? I already showed you guys a clip in a video a while ago. I'm not going to bore you with it here. But Conor said, look, any other fighter of my magnitude would come back to a tune-up fight. You know, I just want to get back in there. He was basically asking in a previous interview for a tune-up fight from the UFC. Listen, he's like, oh, the matchmaking's excellent over here. 36 years old, coming back from a broken leg. Now, he may very well fight in the UFC. We're going to talk about that as we go through these clips. But I'm just saying, even if he comes back and fights one time, which he talks about the Chandler fight here in a little bit, if he comes back and fights one time, and then he decides to leave or wait out his sunset clause, or maybe he fights twice because he has 2 fights left on his deal, what's perfect for Conor? To go somewhere where he's getting a large percentage of the revenue, much larger than what the UFC is willing to offer, hand-picked matchups, and primarily striking. I know it's bare knuckle, but I think this makes a lot of sense for Conor McGregor's future. And he also has Saudi Arabia in his back pocket. Imagine some type of BKFC collab with Saudi Arabia where Conor McGregor's headlining the card. Think about that. Now, again, we're going to talk about whether he still fights with the UFC or not in a little bit, but think about that. That is a very interesting prospect of Saudi Arabia paying BKFC a massive amount of money to put on a BKFC event over there, headlined by Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor, I've said this before, he is the most underpaid fighter in the UFC roster. You have to realize, and I'm throwing out random numbers here, if Conor McGregor generates $300 million for the UFC, and again, I'm just making up a number here, and he's getting paid 20 or 30 million. I know people are like, oh, 20, 30 million. But you have to think about that compared to what he's bringing in. So if he leaves the UFC, he can potentially get more money than the UFC could ever even offer him because the UFC is not going to give him like a 50% cut. That's never going to happen. Next clip. He's asked, basically, I forgot exactly what he was asked here, but he talks about the growth of BKFC and that he sees it skyrocketing. And it's going to be very interesting because obviously he's promoting the business, but if Conor ends up fighting for BKFC, that's going to send BKFC through the roof in terms of stock report.
100%. You know, we've got the big events, we've got the big purses, and we've got big names. We've got big names and we've got rising stars. And like I said, the trajectory for growth here at Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship is above and beyond anyone else. Other sports and organizations are almost at a peak of where they're at. We are just on this trajectory that is non-stop. And you want to be a part of this. Any real fighter, as I said earlier on, any real fighter wants their name on this dais. Any real fighter wants to be on this dais. Who's he talking about? I mean, I know he's trying to recruit other fighters. I understand that. You're going to see more evidence. This isn't just it. I understand he's promoting.
but any real fighter wants to be on this dais.
That wants to carry that world title, to be a world bare knuckle fighting championship champion is an absolute incredible feat. And you know, that's it. It's just it's different. This game is different.
So he's asked a question here about, I forgot exactly what the question is, but the answer is very, very telling. I think it was something about like, what's next for you? What do you want to conquer next? And he starts talking about the UFC and finishing business with the UFC. We'll listen to the question and the answer.
You know, for you personally, right, you've done so much in your career. You've fought, you're now promoting fights. You know, you conquered the movie industry. Is there anything else you're looking to do to bring yourself into the entertainment world and to conquer as well?
So there you go. There's the question. It wasn't really about the UFC. And he starts going on about the UFC. Listen to this.
Look, I was very close to my bout taking place. I was about 3 or 4 weeks out. I had a little lapse in concentration. I'm shit hot. I'm very, very good. And
I don't even know what he just said there. I'm shit tough? Is that, somebody let me know the translation of what he just said.
I mean that. And, you know, my accuracy will lend well into this sport. You take my gloves off, my speed and my accuracy will lend very well into this game. But, you know, I had that issue in the last fight and I had to reschedule and postpone. I'm just looking forward to getting back into the octagon myself, you know, handling my business with the Ultimate Fighting Championship and seeing what the future holds. The future's bright for sure.
So, now obviously he says he's going to get back in the cage in the octagon, so that means he's going to fight with the UFC. There's another clip with an interview that he did where he talks about Michael Chandler and potentially fighting at the end of the year. But I'm going to finish my business with the UFC and see what the future holds. The future's bright. That sounds a lot like Conor wants to fight out his deal, bare minimum, you know, even if you think he's going to return. Which it seems like maybe, you know, depending on when, I would love to know when he signed his contract exactly. Because let's say he signed, you know, right before the third Dustin Poirier fight, maybe that would make more sense that he just wants to fight out those 2 fights and then move on to BKFC or move on to BKFC in Saudi Arabia, some type of collab there. But it's very interesting. He's openly talking about, well, I need to finish business with the UFC. So it's going to be very, very interesting these next couple months because you guys have to understand, and I know I've talked about this before, so sorry if you guys are hearing this is a little bit repetitive. Dana White and the UFC hates when big names fight out their contracts. That was the problem with Francis Ngannou. They ice certain fighters because they don't want you to get down to 2 fights. They don't want you to get down to 1 fight left on your deal because then you have leverage. They don't want you to be able to be a free agent because then you have some type of leverage over them. And especially when you fight out your deal, now other people can give you offers and the UFC has to go into a bidding war, which they aren't willing to do. So it's very, very interesting if Conor fights out his deal like he seems like he wants to. Every single interview, I've covered a lot of them. He's like, yeah, I got 2 fights left on my deal. I got 2 fights left on my deal. I got 2 fights left on my deal. That is open negotiation with the UFC, but that's also him playing his hand like, look, I'm just going to fight these 2 fights and then I'm going to go somewhere I can make more money. AKA BKFC, Saudi Arabia. Both those places he can make more money or even a collab with one of them together. Now in this next clip, and there's way more. There's way more interesting stuff that he says. I got to show you a couple more things. This next clip, this isn't even, I mean, we got 2 more of the probably the best clips of Conor talking about Chandler, Conor talking about his future with the UFC, Conor talking about 2 fights left on his contract. It's very, very interesting. But this next clip, he was asked about Ilia Topuria.
All of these guys, make no mistake about it, are looking at this. So, you know, if you're asking him, I'd be King Kong if you're asking me. You know what I'm saying? So, but it'd be exciting to see these crossover. And make no mistake about it now, this is a viable option. And in my opinion, the only option.
This is a viable option and the only option. He's talking about other fighters coming over to BKFC. Because Conor's thinking, look, if I fight at BKFC, it's going to inspire a lot of fighters. If they can pay Conor McGregor, they must be able to pay me as well. And he's trying to inspire some crossover. Now, he could just be blowing smoke up people's ass. Maybe that's what he's doing. But I think he's really kind of showing his hand to the UFC. Look, I got options. I got leverage. Let me fight out my deal.
I don't want to see, nor do I give a fuck about UFC fighters going to PFL or going to another promotion. You need to break it up. You need to mix it up. You need to come and try something new to really break into that next level of, you know, superstardom, of respect, of money, of power.
So there you go. That's how he's feeling about BKFC. He even talked, kind of hinted about, oh, Topuria could come over here a little bit. He would smack the head off of him and whatnot. I mean, he's just talking about fighters that he would absolutely get destroyed by, but that's besides the point. I understand he's promoting for the organization, But it seems like Conor's head at is, I'm going to fight out my UFC deal and I'm going to leave to go to BKFC. And he was basically almost asked about that directly in this next clip, which is very, very interesting. I left the question in. Check this out. This is like one of the very first questions of the press conference. What would you say to fighters who are fighting out their UFC contracts and thinking about coming to BKFC? And Conor says, well, that's me. Listen to this. It's very, very interesting.
What's your message to marquee fighters ending or approaching the end of their contract to come to BKFC?
You know, I am. That's me. I am coming to the end of my contract. I have 2 fights left.
I mean, every single interview, 2 fights left, 2 fights left. He keeps talking about it. So it's going to get interesting in this next 6 months to a year. We're going to see if he ends up fighting Michael Chandler, which he talked about in the interview. We're going to take a look at in a second. But yeah, that's me. I got 2 fights left. And that's what he consistently keeps talking about. And I don't think Conor wants to resign. I really don't. I don't think there's a world, unless somehow the UFC gives him equity, which is what he's been asking for many, many years. Unless they give him equity in the company, Conor's already made. Conor's placing bets and making millions, okay? Because he has so much money to blow. He's got proper 12. He's got a lot of money, like Dana White says. You know, he doesn't have German Shepherds. He's not shooting guns. He's not smacking spray paint cans out of, you know, teenagers' hands during unrest. But this man has a yacht, okay? This man has a yacht. This man has a lot of money. And he may just very well say, you know what? I'm going somewhere else. I'm still a big star. Imagine Conor fights 4 or 5 more times in the UFC. He's going to ruin his star power because he's going to get destroyed. He's getting old. He's coming off an injury. He's slowing down. You think he's going to go in there and spark out top-level names? Absolutely, positively not. Let's listen to some more.
This is a very, very exciting organization here. And for sure, you know, how could you not? How could you not look to become a two-sport world champion and something as wild as a bare knuckle fighting organization? So, you know, we've got the money too. We've got the dough. This is big payouts here also. You know, big pay, big shows, big news, and, you know, a coveted world title in a wild and dangerous game. For any real fighter out there, that's all you want to hear, you know. Money, power, respect, and bare knuckle fighting championship has it all.
So there you go. I mean, yeah, that's me. That's me. I got 2 fights left on my deal. Money, power, respect. We got big purses. I know I've said this a couple times, and I'm sorry for repeating myself. Yeah, you know, I got 2 fights left on my deal, and we got big purses. We got all this. We got that. It sounds like a man who's ready to go to BKFC. And that's what I think is going to happen inevitably. And I think there might be some partnership between BKFC and Saudi Arabia. Now, next interview we're going to take a look at. And by the way, I'll link all these videos down in the description if you want to go check them out for full context. But I've pulled out the most pertinent clips from each one of them. This one's very interesting. He's talking about Italian fighters, and then he's asked about Marvin Vettori, and he says, well, Marvin Vettori's still in the UFC, right? And they're like, so are you? And he said, oh, yeah, I'm definitely with the UFC, but, you know, I'm with BKFC too. Anyone can get it in BKFC too, which I thought, okay. And this was the first clip I saw, and then I said, okay, let me see what all other press Conor has done. And I'm telling you, I think this guy's dead set on leaving the BKFC. I'm going to give my like full theory towards the end of this video after we go through everything. But I really think he's dead set on going to BKFC.
Don't know. Where is he in the UFC still or no?
I think so.
I don't know, to be honest. I have not heard much about him.
You are UFC too.
I'm UFC for sure.
So there you go. He says, you're UFC too. And he says, I'm UFC for sure, but listen to what he says afterwards.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, no, I'm also bare knuckle if anyone wants it. You know, so.
I'm also bare knuckle if ever anyone wants it. Now, I know that's just kind of a throwaway line, but I'm telling you, it's the narrative he's trying to build, whether it's just negotiations with the UFC or he plans on actually doing it, which I believe he does. It's still interesting to point out. And then the next clip I'm going to show you, he talks about his contract again. I mean, this guy's always talking about his contract openly. He's been talking about it for the last year. And, you know, it seems like there's definitely some open air negotiations going on here. And he actually talks about Michael Chandler as well.
What about you? Yes, 2 fights.
2 fights left on my UFC contract.
And then you're taking off your gloves and joining.
Possibly.
So I got 2 fights left on my contract, and they said, I don't know if you can hear the journalist. He says, and then you're taking off your gloves for BKFC? And he says, possibly.
Yes, possibly.
And you know, any idea of what? 1 year, 6 months, 2 months?
Well, I have my fight. I had my fight, and it had to get postponed. but that's still going to happen this year, end of this year. The talk is the end of this year, so I'd like to finish out the year with that. Then
Imagine you've been sitting on the sidelines for 2 years and you hear Conor say, oh, yeah, the talk is the end of this year, which has been, over the last, week or so, there's been talk of, okay, it looks like Conor McGregor is going to return in December of 2024, which will it be against Michael Chandler? He talks about Michael Chandler here in a second, but he says, look, it's going to be at the end of this year. We'll see if that comes to fruition. He doesn't sound super confident. Dana doesn't sound super confident in the Shaq podcast that I showed you earlier, so it's going to be interesting, but let's listen to more what he had to say.
I've got one left, so we'll see what happens. After that, I'm going to see what's on the horizon. A bare knuckle fighting world title sounds very, very exciting to me.
I mean, can he spell it out any more clear? If he goes to BKFC, he's going to get hand-picked matchup after hand-picked matchup after hand-picked matchup. Now, I know he says he wants to fight for the title. Okay. But it just makes a lot of sense, and they're going to sell a lot. His name is already there. They're going to sell a lot. So I really think his plan is, and I'm very curious to see if he fights out these last 2 fights. I don't really know how that's going to play out yet because I don't know when he signed his contract. I would love to know exactly when he signed his last contract because then we would know the exit date on the sunset clause. But I'll tell you right now, if the UFC and Conor are, running into some kind of behind-the-scenes trouble, we will know. Dana won't be able to hide it once it gets to a boiling point where they're actually really pissed at each other. And Dana isn't happy. You think he wants Conor to fight out his deal and then go to another organization? It's not about being pissed at Conor necessarily and needing Conor. The UFC would be just fine without Conor. I mean, Conor's barely fought in the last 8 years. It's about not wanting him to go elsewhere and build up a competitor. And I'm telling you right now, whether Dana says it or not, he looks at BKFC as a competitor. So it's going to get very interesting. And the last clip I want to show you is this from another press conference. I guess this is before he actually sat down and talked about it. I mean, could he be any more clear? Could he spell out any more clear what he's doing here?
No one in this combat sports space can speak one word of bad mouth about a bare knuckle fighting world champion. And that, for me, is money in the bank. So, for me, I have a bit of business left with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, 2 fights left on my contract. But for sure, we've got 3 lightweights up here on the dais. And, I have my eye on all of this. I'm not up here just as an owner. Player manager. I'll try it on myself on this one, yeah.
Player and manager. Very, very interesting indeed. Look, if I had to predict right now, and it's such a fluid situation, we're finding out new details every day. It seems like Conor's plan is to at least fight one more time in the UFC, potentially fight both times, leave to go to BKFC. My guess is maybe BKFC will just promote him on their own because he is part owner. But I think BKFC might have some, deal in place with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is going to pay them a boatload of cash to have Conor McGregor come over and fight in BKFC. Conor McGregor is going to make a bunch of money. BKFC is going to make a bunch of money. BKFC is going to grow. And what does Conor McGregor have with BKFC? He has an ownership stake, which he has asked for time and time again in the UFC, and he has never received. Years ago, a lot of newer fans don't know this. There was negotiations between the UFC and Conor publicly, and Conor was saying, look, I want equity in the company. And Dana was basically like, that's never going to happen. We're never going to do that. The UFC does not like to give any true power to the fighter. So Dana is going to fight this tooth and nail to figure out a way to tie up Conor, to delay Conor. That's why they're not going to make a new date for him. Okay, there's talk of Conor wanting to fight at the Sphere. There's talk of him wanting to, a new date being created in September, October. I believe best case scenario for Conor, he fights in December. But the reason he's not going to fight any sooner is because the UFC wants to delay. And part of it's on Conor's, accord. He did break his pinky toe. He pulled out of UFC 303. The UFC and Dana White is not happy about that. But this is going to be a story that we can really pay attention to over the next 6 months to a year. But I'll tell you this right now. I will make this prediction. I've kind of been on the fence a little bit. Within the next 2 years, and I know this maybe isn't the craziest prediction, I believe Conor McGregor will be gone from the UFC. He doesn't have the confidence to compete with top level fighters, and it doesn't make sense for him to be in the UFC right now, especially considering, he's generating hundreds of millions of dollars for the UFC, and then in return, he's getting like 20, 30 million, maybe 50 at most. It doesn't really make sense when he can go somewhere else, kind of self-promote. He has the money to do that, or BKFC's infrastructure to do that and make much more money than the UFC is willing to offer him. So I think Conor McGregor's time with the UFC is coming to an end very, very soon. I think ultimately ends up with BKFC. Could he renegotiate a contract with Dana White in the UFC and stay there forever? Yes. Could this be just posturing and promotion for BKFC? Yes. But I very, very much doubt this. And I can't believe these clips haven't been circulating around. There's been like 1 or 2 of those clips, mainly the Michael Chandler one of him sitting in the chair, but that was pretty much it. You know, a lot of these clips got missed by, you know, the typical suspects on Twitter, Instagram. So I wanted to make this video. I think Conor McGregor is going to go to BKFC probably in 2025 and fight in BKFC in 2025. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Does Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler ever happen? I'm curious what you guys think, because I'm beginning to shift a little bit. I was at like 1% it happens. Now I'm at maybe like 10% it happens, because it really seems like Conor wants to get this fight and get out of this contract and move on to what he deems bigger and better things. Let me know what you guys think. Please share the video. Please subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.